Hello, it's me with G. Hernandez Life Bible Study. Today will be a reading of Leviticus chapter 22. And before we get started, as always, I'll go ahead and uh, read the Lord's Prayer as it is written in Matthew 6, starting in verse 9. And so let's go ahead and begin that prayer. It goes, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So, as usual, what I'll go ahead and do is I will read through Leviticus chapter 22 using King James Version. And afterwards, with the help of the Holy Spirit, I'll go ahead and go back line by line and discuss what is happening. So here I've got a quick, um, let's see, some things to look out for in Leviticus 22. So we're going to see that it's a chapter with 33 verses, 1 through 9. We're going to see that the priest must be clean to handle the holy things. And then verses 10 through 16, we'll talk about who may eat of the holy offerings. 17 through 25, we'll read about sacrifices must be without blemish. And then 26 to 30, we'll see some further rules for acceptable sacrifices. And verses 31 through 33, we'll see about keeping the commandments and not profaning God's name. So, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll be reading out of eSword. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Chapter 22, and it reads, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and his sons that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, and that they profane not my holy name in those things which they hallow unto me. I am the Lord. Say unto them, Whosoever he be of all your seed among your generations, that goeth unto the holy things, which the children of Israel hallow unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, that soul shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. What man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper, or hath a running issue, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. And whoso toucheth anything that is unclean by the dead, or a man whose seed goeth from him, or whosoever toucheth any creeping thing, whereby he may be made unclean, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath, the soul which hath touched any such shall be unclean until even, and shall not eat of the holy things, unless he wash his flesh with water. And when the sun is down, he shall be clean, and shall afterward eat of the holy things, because it is his food. That which dieth of itself, or is torn with beasts, he shall not eat to defile himself wherewith. I am the Lord. They shall keep mine ordinance, lest they bear sin for it, and die therefore. If they profane it, I the Lord do sanctify them. There shall no stranger eat of the holy thing, a sojourner of the priest, or an hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing. But if the priest buy any soul with his money, he shall eat of it, and he that is born in his house, they shall eat of his meat. If the priest's daughter also be married unto a stranger, she may not eat of an offering of the holy things. But if the priest's daughter be a widow or divorced and have no child, and is returned unto her father's house as in her youth, she shall eat of her father's meat, but there shall no stranger eat thereof. And if a man eat of the holy thing unwittingly, then he shall put the fifth part thereof unto it, and shall give it unto the priest with the holy thing. And they shall not profane the holy things of the children of Israel, which they offer unto the Lord, or suffer them to bear the iniquity of trespasses, when they eat their holy things, for I the Lord do sanctify them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and to his sons and unto all the children of Israel, and say unto them, whatsoever he be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers in Israel, that will offer his oblation for all his vows and for all his free will offerings, which they will offer unto the Lord as a burnt offering. Ye shall offer at your own will a male without blemish of the beeves, of the sheep, or of the goats. But whatsoever hath a blemish, they shall ye not offer, for it shall not be acceptable for you. And whosoever offereth the sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a freewill offering in beeves or sheep, it shall be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no blemish therein. Blind or broken or maimed, or having a wen or scurvy or scabbed, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire of them upon the altar unto the Lord. Either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in his parts, that mayest thou offer for a free will offering, but for a vow it shall not be accepted. Ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which is bruised, or crushed, or broken, or cut, neither shall ye make any offering thereof in your land. Neither from a stranger's hand shall ye offer the bread of your God of any of these, because their corruption is in them, and blemishes be in them. They shall not be accepted for you. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, when a bullock or a sheep or a goat is brought forth, then it shall be 7 days under the dam, and from the 8th day and thenceforth it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And whether it be cow or ewe, ye shall not kill it and her young both in one day. And when ye will offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving unto the Lord, offer it at your own will. On the same day it shall be eaten up. Ye shall leave none of it until the morrow. I am the Lord. Therefore shall ye keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. Neither shall ye profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord which hallow you, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. Okay, so basically, again, I've read it from King James Version. That was Leviticus 22. And these are the topics that we're going to be seeing. Priests must be clean to handle holy things. Who may eat of the holy offerings? Sacrifices must be without blemish. We've got some further rules for acceptable sacrifices. And obviously, the last portion is to keep told, where we're told to keep the commandments and do not profane God's names. So let's go back and look through that. In particular, let's say we are looking verses 1 through 9. The priest must be clean to handle the holy things. So we have at the beginning, verse 1, the Lord spake unto Moses. So God is speaking to Moses. And remember, we got to put ourselves back in where we are. This is Moses. They've fled Egypt. They came into the desert, and they end up spending 40 years in the desert. If you remember, this is all after the Exodus. And in this time, Moses is being given the law, and this is part of the law. So God is giving them this law, right? And part of their law is that they must, first off, like it says, he tells Aaron and his sons that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, and that they profane not my holy name. So the priests were supposed to be separated. And this is from the line of Aaron. So Aaron is Moses' brother, if you recall, and Aaron is the high priest. Remember, Aaron was the high priest, and God told Moses that Aaron would be to Moses as Moses was to God, or Moses would be to Aaron as God was to Moses, something along those lines. So they're not supposed to say anything bad about the Lord. So if you're a priest and you say, man, I am really tired of God, or God is too mean to us, I mean, that is profaning his name, let alone saying, some of the other words or phrases that we hear about today, obviously, like, I don't know if they say the and all kinds of things, hell with hell and holy. But these would all be things that the priests themselves were not to say, because they were hallow unto the Lord. So they had a very strict code, a code that we obviously today cannot live by. Even in their day, they were very hard pressed and they could not live by it. That's why ultimately they were carried away to Babylon, and Israel was carried off to Assyria. So going on to verse 3, it says, and this is still Lord speaking unto Moses, he says unto them, say unto them, whosoever he be of all your seed among your generations that goeth unto the holy things, which the children of Israel shall hallow unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, that soul shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. So if anybody is unclean and they go into the temple, and if you recall from our previous videos in Exodus, and there was the temple, and only the priests were allowed to go into the temple, and only the high priest was allowed to go into the holy of holies, which was in the very back, which was only they were only able to do that one time a year. So while they were in the temple, and right now it's not the temple, it's the tabernacle, it's the tent. And when they go into the tabernacle, if they are unclean, they have to be cut off from his presence. And so there was many things that could actually make you unclean. Um, so again, that's what we're seeing in verses 1 through 9. The priest must be clean to handle the holy things. So if they're not clean, they must be cut off from his presence, which in our day, modern times, that's kind of like what we would consider going to jail. I mean, it probably wasn't as strict as what we have in jail, where we would actually confine you in a prison. They probably weren't confined anywhere, but they were cut off, meaning that they were probably kicked out of the camp. It doesn't seem like, who does it say? It says, any of them who would be of all your seed among the generations. So I guess we're really talking about the Levites, but I imagine, I mean, the anybody that wasn't a Levite, they weren't really supposed to be going in the first place. So this kind of just applies to everybody. If you go in and you're unclean, you're cut off from his presence, meaning you have to leave the camp. Modern days, it would be like you're going to jail. So what goes on in verse 4? It says that what man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper. So more things about the cleanliness. If they're a leper or they have some sort of a running issue, they were not allowed to eat of the holy things until they be clean. And whoso toucheth anything that is unclean by the dead or a man, or whose seed goeth from him. So this is saying that anybody that was a priest from the line of Aaron, if they had leprosy or a running issue, and a running issue, I mean, that's what's saying, like, so say you had a cut, like a wound, maybe you had a visible sore, or like maybe you cut your arm and it's just not healing very well, or it's taking a long time to heal, and you had, kind of blood coming out, or some sort of issue where you just kept bleeding out every now and then from this cut. That meant you were unclean, so you weren't even supposed to eat if you had that kind of an issue. And also, I imagine, like, if you had any other kind of a running issue, like some sort of sickness that just kept coming back, something like that. um, Also, it says that they weren't allowed to eat of the holy things. So remember, this is that there's a few different types of sacrifices that the people were supposed to do. One of them was like the burnt sacrifice. And from the burnt sacrifice, nobody was supposed to eat of that. Obviously, everything was supposed to be burned. But there were some free will sacrifices and some other kind of sacrifices that uh, the priests themselves took a portion. You would give them something, and they would burn a memorial of it. So they would get, like, the flour and the oil, and they'd kind of get some on the dead animal, the meat, and burn that portion. They would kind of burn a portion for God, a memorial, but they would also be able to keep, like, the whole piece of meat that they were given, and they would be able to eat of it. But if you're unclean, can't eat from it. And you can also become unclean by touching something that was unclean themselves. So if you touch somebody that was unclean, or if you touched an unclean animal, or if you touch a dead animal, and also a man whose seed goeth forth from him. So that means a man that has, had some sexual intercourse or some sort of sexual release. So if you made love to your wife in the morning, you were unclean and you could not eat until you be clean. And obviously there was laws, if you remember, for how long you were unclean and what you had to do to make yourself clean. Going into verse 5, whosoever toucheth any creeping thing, whereby he may be made unclean, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath. So, same thing. There's different animals that you could touch that were unclean, and if you touched them, even though they were alive, you became unclean. uh, or again right here, or a man of whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath. That's kind of like what I said in the last verse, that if you touch somebody that was unclean, you became unclean too. So that's even kind of interesting too, because when you think about it, that means people really had to be communicating with each other to tell each other when they were unclean. And it was really like an honor system. I mean, because you could say, for example, as a man, you can do something in the morning, by yourself when nobody else is around, and who would know? Who would know that you were unclean for the rest of the day, right? Maybe you go out and you find an animal, an unclean animal touched you. You weren't really paying attention. It ran up across your leg or something. It was really up to you to tell the rest of the congregation. So you can only imagine that it was easy to touch somebody that was unclean, not knowing that they were unclean, because maybe they just weren't telling people. So moving on, verse 6, the soul which hath touched any such shall be unclean until even, shall not eat of the holy things unless he wash his flesh with water. So you see that he's going to be unclean until the evening, and he won't be able to eat of the holy things. And then even then, you have to wash yourself with water afterwards. So come evening, you had to basically like bathe yourself, or wash yourself in the waters, and that's what you had to do before you actually became clean again. So if you were unclean and you didn't manage to wash your flesh with water, I mean, you were still unclean, weren't you? Which again is saying you can't eat of the holy things. Mind you, this is for the Levites, the priests in particular, because they were the ones that were eating of the holy things. Verse 7, we see that when the sun is down, he shall be clean and shall afterward eat of the holy things, because it is his food. And if you remember, you weren't allowed to hold on to this food for very long. I believe you were only able to keep it for like one day, one night. I don't think you were able to eat it on the third day. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to go back and look, but yeah, you have a time limit on when you can eat this. So if you made yourself unclean, you had to go separate. You had to get out of town a lot of times. Remember the uncleanness? You had to be separated. You couldn't come into contact with people, or else you would make them unclean. And then you had to wait till even time, which is 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And then at that point, you can wash yourself with water, and then you can eat of the holy things, because it was his food. So this was kind of getting into dangerous territory. If you became unclean, so many days in a row, I mean, you could very well start starving as one of these Levite priests. Verse 8, let's see, that which dieth of itself, or is torn with beast, he shall not eat to defile himself therewith. I am the Lord. So this means, like, apparently some people would, if you found a dead animal, you couldn't eat it because that would be defiling yourself. If you found an animal that you watched it get killed by wild beast, maybe you saw some sort of deer or whatever, and it got killed by a lion out there, and maybe you got rid of the lion, but and then suddenly you had the dead deer. You couldn't just eat it because that would be defiling yourself. The Lord had high standards. So that is something to keep in mind, that standards for God are very high, for righteousness, they're very high. And at the end of the day, many people just could not keep up with them. I mean, that was really the end of that was what happened. Israel and Judah just did not end up following the law going forward after this, or they didn't keep up with it very well. And it's easy to understand why, because there's a lot of things that are just hard to fulfill. Um, let's see, but let's keep moving on. Verse 9. They shall therefore keep mine ordinance, lest they bear sin for it and die therefore. See, you could die for not, for if you, again, if you kept becoming unclean too many days in a row, you could potentially end up not eating very well, and just start getting sick. And then if you get sick and you have a running issue, also you weren't allowed into to eat of the holy thing. So Levite priest had limited options after that, and if they profane it, right there, that's what they're saying. If you die there for, if they profane it, so I, the Lord, do sanctify them. So God is saying that He sanctifies them, but if they continued profaning the Lord and not keeping His ordinance, they would die. They would die for it. And moving into verse 10, let's see, verse 10. We go back to 10 through 16. Who may eat of the holy offerings? So let's go and check out who can eat of these offerings. Let me just keep that up there. Okay. Verse 10. There shall no stranger eat of the holy thing. A sojourner of the priest or an hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing. So let's get into that. A stranger, a sojourner of the priest. So, like, somebody that was maybe a foreigner, who was not somebody from Israel, who is not somebody, who is not one of the sons of Israel, they were not allowed to eat of the holy things. The priests could hire servants, and those servants could not eat of the holy things. So just because you were a servant of a Levite priest did not mean you were able to have any of the offerings that were given to the priest. They shall not eat any of the holy thing, right? And verse 11, let's see. If the priest buy any soul with his money, he shall eat of it. And he that is born of his house, they shall eat of his meat. So there's a difference here. So a hired servant is a hired servant, but they were able to have slaves in those days, remember? And the slave was somebody that was purchased with money, and they basically came into that bloodline, that family line, as kind of like a member of the family. Even though they were purchased, they were like a slave, they were still considered like kind of the family. See right here, he can eat of it. He was part of the line all of a sudden. And he that is born of his house. There was also laws about the slaves, that a slave was only supposed to be temporary for 7 years, if you remember. And they were, for example, they were allowed to leave, but if he had a wife and children that his master gave him, if he loved his wife and children, and when he was freed, he could go on without his wife and children. But if he wanted to stay behind with the wife and children, he had to become a slave of that person for life, and he had to go and get like a piercing in his ear. So that would be how these things happened, and how their households got bigger, is through this kind of slavery type situation, which was basically bringing somebody into the family. And they were also, if you were born a slave, that isn't to say that they were treated like the best of the highest people in the family. That's not to say that at all. But if they were born a slave in the house, they were also able to eat of the sacrifices that were given to the priest. So keep that in mind. A hired servant, no, but an actual slave, yes. Verse 20, verse 12, we see about the daughter. So if the daughter is married unto a stranger, she was not able to eat of the offering of the holy thing. So the priests are Levites, remember, and if they had a daughter, as when she's young, she's able to eat. Um, But when she gets to that age and she goes and marries, if she married somebody that was not a Levite priest, then she wasn't able to eat any more of the holy things. She was cut off from that. And then we get into verse 13 where it kind of goes, it tells a little bit more about that. It says that, but if the priest's daughter is a widow or she's divorced or have no child and she's returned unto her father's house as in her youth, then she could eat of her father's meat. But there shall no stranger eat thereof. So still, like, if she gets married to one of the other tribes, a member of one of the other tribes, she becomes that person's wife. And say she marries somebody out of the tribe of Judah, she's not a Levite anymore. So she's not able to eat of that. But if she gets widowed or she gets divorced and or has no child, basically that's that idea that, hey, she's no longer with her husband. She has to come back to live with her father because, in those days, women didn't have the best survivability, I guess, or the best opportunities maybe out there. So she gets to come back. She's like a child again, as in her youth, and she gets to eat of the sacrifices as well. Verse 14, and if a man eat of the holy thing unwittingly, then he shall put the fifth part thereof unto it and shall give it unto the priest with the holy thing. So now you got the idea of somebody that is one of these people that isn't supposed to eat anything. So maybe it's one of the strangers, and maybe he comes to temple and he doesn't know that, hey, there's some food out right there on the table, and he goes to go eat it, not realizing, hey, that belongs to one of the priests. um you can't be eating that, and now you have to replace it, and you have to add an extra fifth part, an extra 20%. So obviously that's with meat and animals. If we think about it in money terms, the idea is, oh, you ate $100 worth of stuff. It's, you got to put $120 back in, whatever that worked out to in their time using the meat. But it goes on in verse 15, they shall not profane the holy things of the children of Israel, which they offer unto the Lord. So obviously they're not supposed to profane the holy things. You can only imagine what it means to profane one of these sacrifices. I mean, like the idea of having these sacrifices and you're supposed to eat it. It's good for eating. And I don't know, maybe you go and bury it in the dirt or something, or maybe you go and you give it to a wild animal, like or feed it to the dogs. That probably would not be a good thing. That would be like profaning it. um Amongst other things, I'm sure in the world of evil things, there's also all kinds of other ideas you can, things you can do with dead meat like that. But you know the idea is, if you profane the holy things, they weren't supposed to, because if they did, as earlier he said, they would die, right? They would eventually die. They also weren't supposed to suffer them to bear the iniquity of trespass when they eat their holy things, for I, the Lord, do sanctify them. So that means that they weren't supposed to do any kinds of profaning of the sacrifices, and they weren't supposed to basically let others do it. So if you saw somebody profaning uh, an offering, you know, talking bad about it, I mean, I could imagine too, like as a priest, for example, maybe you get a sacrifice and you start complaining about how, oh, this guy that gave me the sacrifice is a terrible person and I don't like him. And, this sacrifice isn't going to help the guy. And if you start saying things like that, that's kind of profaning it too, because you're saying that God's, word isn't uh isn't capable, like he's incapable of cleaning somebody for their trespass. That would also be something that seems like that they're profaning the holy things. And if you heard, as another priest, you're a priest, and you hear somebody else talking about somebody else's sacrifice and how it just isn't enough or whatever, profaning it, you weren't supposed to let that stand. If they were out there, oh, I'm going out and I'm going to go feed the sacrifice to my dogs. What? You better not do that. I will not suffer you to bear the iniquity of trespass. That's what that's talking about right there. Because the Lord does sanctify them. That's what it says. For I, the Lord, do sanctify them. So if you don't believe it, then that's you not believing it, right? So next we also have, let's see, moving on, let's go just to be consistent, verses 17 through 25, we're going to see that the sacrifices must be without blemish, right? Okay, so hold on just a moment. I'm trying to get this back in order. Okay, so in verse 17, we've got like another spot where it starts to say, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, so we saw that at the beginning. And so you can see that going 16 verses, then we kind of stop and we start again. So perhaps this is maybe different documents that were written in those days. Maybe this was a different day. Maybe this was a different moment. Or maybe this was, I'm not really sure, but they start again. And he says that the Lord spake unto Moses. And what is he telling Moses? He says, again, he says, speak unto Aaron, who is the high priest. He says, speak unto Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel, and tell them whatsoever he be of the house of Israel or of the strangers in Israel, that he will offer his oblation for all his vows. The oblation is what we're talking about, the sacrifice. It was an oblation. The oblation was given to the priest. And that was given for all his vows and for all his free will offerings, which they offer unto the Lord for a burnt sacrifice or for a burnt offering. So, what is he saying here? You got to tell everybody, whoever's going to offer their oblation, you can offer the oblation for all his vows and for your free will offerings, which they will offer unto the Lord for a burnt offering, which the Lord, the priest offer as a burnt offering, right? You can eat at your own will a male without blemish. You shall offer at your own will a male without blemish of the beeves, of the sheep, or of the goats. So you can offer an animal without blemish. So you couldn't give them an animal that was, I don't know, missing a foot or had an eye put out or maybe had mange or maybe had bad, things going on in its fur. So of the beeves, that's what beavers, of the sheep or of the goats. So that's what you could offer for your free will offering and your vows, right? But what if anything has a blemish, that ye shall not offer, for it shall not be acceptable for you. So again, remember, they were supposed to be blemish free. The sacrifices must be without blemish. And what else does he say? He says, whosoever offers the sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a free will offering in beeves or sheep. So these are talking about two different sacrifice types. There's a sacrifice for a vow, which, remember, a vow sacrifice is that you made a sacrifice and you made a vow. So you asked for something and you made a promise. So you said, please God, give me a son. If you do, I will do something for you. And you must accomplish that vow, or else it's like you did not pay. If you don't do your side of the bargain, God won't do his. Whereas a free will offering was something that you freely gave to the priest, and the priest got their oblation. So it was like the idea of like, hey, priest, you guys are doing a good job. I want to give you an offering that you guys can take for yourselves. And the priest would go and they would offer some of that as a burnt offering, but they would keep the rest and they would eat that, and that's what they would survive off of for that's supposed to be what they would survive off of for the most part. And so it's saying that if you're offering one of these kinds of sacrifices, and if you're doing it with the beeves or the sheep, then it must be perfect to be accepted. You can't give him a sheep that was missing an eye. You couldn't give him a sheep that had a big old cut along its side. He had a big old open wound or something. Maybe a dog had gotten to it. You couldn't give that. It's not acceptable. There shall be no blemish therein. And verse 22, we've got some more, explanation on what that means. Blind or broken or maimed or having a wen or scurvy or scabbed. Yeah, that makes sense. Blind, broken bones, maimed, like I said, missing a foot or missing a leg or something, missing a body part, missing a tail, whatever that might be. Having a wen, I'm not sure what a wen is, but I'm assuming it's something to do with a medical thing, a scurvy, some sort of sickness. If it had sickness or if it was scabbed, like, yeah, even if it had a big gash and yeah, maybe it's healing over, but it's still scabbed. That would not suffice. You shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire of them upon the altar. They're not even good for sacrifices, the burning sacrifices. So remember, the vow sacrifice, the free will offering, they must be perfect. Going into verse 23, either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in its part, that mayest thou offer for a free will offering, but for a vow it shall not be accepted. So remember, there's two different types of sacrifices he's talking about. So now he was talking about the beeves or the sheep, they got to be perfect. You could give a bull or a lamb that might, be that has anything superfluous or lacking in its parts. So now you get into the idea that, okay, now you've got a less perfect bull or a lamb, which are two different animals than a beef or the sheep, right? You got a bull or a lamb. They might have a little bit of problems, and that you can offer for a free will offering. So that's the free will. Like I said, you gave it to the priests. The priest burned a portion of it, but they also took a portion for eating. Now, the vow, I think, was separate where they was all burnt. It was the burnt offering. Um, and in that case, again, that you still cannot give an imperfect bull or lamb. A vow sacrifice still had to be a perfect sacrifice, no blemishes on it. So that's something that they had to keep in mind. Um, and let's see, moving into verse 24, it also said that ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which is bruised or crushed or broken or cut, neither shall ye make any offering thereof in your land. Again, yeah, so same thing, kind of going over that you're not supposed to give anything that's bruised or crushed or broken, which is kind of like what we had read up above, blind or broken or maimed back in verse 22. And he's just reiterating that these are no-goes on those sacrifices. You can't just give animals that are unfit for sacrifice. So they had to be perfect and best of health, the best conditions. That's what these animals needed to be. And let's see, verse 25, it says, neither from a stranger's hand shall ye offer the bread of your God, or any of these, because their corruption is in them, and blemishes be in them, they shall not be accepted for you. So from a stranger's hand, so if somebody from a stranger, so again, you're thinking about a foreigner here. Now, if a foreigner came to give you something to sacrifice, uh, you weren't supposed to accept any of these because it says their corruption is in them. So he considered the foreigners and the outsiders corrupted and that they had blemishes and that their sacrifices were unacceptable. Now, mind you, this is in the Old Testament. So in the New Testament, you have to realize that we are no longer giving sacrifices, that instead we are called to be living sacrifices ourselves, to die to ourselves and to live for Jesus Christ. So we are the holy sacrifices ourselves now. And that's why he says we shall be perfect. But in these days, before the mystery of Jesus Christ had been revealed, uh, in the Old Testament days, this is still before even the kings were around, that in these times, God had considered the Gentiles, which is what most of us, what we all are today, we're all Gentiles now, that we Gentiles were all corrupt in those days. And it wasn't until Jesus Christ came and died on the cross that we were made clean in his death. So keep that in mind. But in these days, they weren't able to offer anything because corruption was in them, right? So let's continue forward. Uh, and after verse 25, going into verses 26 to 30, we're going to see that there's further rules for acceptable sacrifices. So there's going to be some more rules that we're going to go over from 26 to 30. So yeah, let's keep taking a look at them then. So here in 26, it says, we start again, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, so again, perhaps a different document that's uh, when they compiled this thing, they probably had different documents or different pieces of paper or something along those lines, and they were compiling it this way. So it goes on to say that when a bull, a sheep, or a goat is brought forth, then it shall be 7 days under the dam, and from the 8th day and thenceforth it shall be accepted for an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So that's interesting. It's saying that if you bring a bull or a sheep or a goat, then it's got to be 7 days under the dam. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Let me see if I can't. How about if we take a look at this? Let's see. That was in verse 27. It says, under the dam. Here it is. In the Greek word, right? This is Hebrew. So in the Hebrew word is a primitive word, a mother, as the bond of the family in a wide sense, both literally and figuratively. Dam, mother, ex parting. So it sounds like what is going on is that when you bring a bull, a sheep, or a goat, mind you, this is not a beeves or well, it's one of the sheeps. Yeah, it's not a beeves though. They're not talking about a beeves. But if you bring a bull, a sheep, or a goat, it's got to be 7 days under the dam. So that means that it's got to be 7 days with its mother at least. And I believe, didn't it say they were supposed to be a year old? They had to at least be a year old, and they had to be with their family, I guess. So with their other animals alongside them. And then on the eighth, for a whole week, and then on the 8th day, then you can accept it for an offering made by fire. So you had to give these things a week before you were able to even sacrifice them. So once you brought them, they had to at least have been under, hanging out with their family for a week, and then you could sacrifice them. And let's see, but then it says, whether it be a cow or ewe, ye shall not kill it and her young both in one day. So you couldn't sacrifice like a mother and a son, or a mother and daughter, I guess, that were these cows. And this also requires, this is something that, husbandry is not something that I think us modern people are all familiar with. There's certain people out there that are, still ranchers and still doing husbandry and still working in the cattle industry and things like that understand uh, how to keep track of these animals. But I mean, I think the average person, I know I wouldn't be able to really. How do you keep track of a cow and their child? Uh, that'd be, it's somebody that has to understand these animals, and in those days they clearly, were required for their survival in the first place. I mean, they're still required for our survival. You think about how many cows we eat, but in today's modern world, we're not really all doing the husbandry as much as the average person was back then. Let's see, verse 29. And when ye will offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving unto the Lord, offer it at your own will. So you couldn't be forced to give a thanksgiving sacrifice. You had to do it your own will. So nobody could tell you, hey, you better go offer that thanksgiving sacrifice. You had to do it willingly. And on the same day it shall be eaten up, ye shall leave none of it until the morrow. I am the Lord. So I think this is one of the sacrifices. This particular sacrifice is another sacrifice. It's not the vow sacrifice, and it's not the free will sacrifice. This is the Thanksgiving sacrifice. And when you did a sacrifice, not only did you gave a portion, an oblation to the priest, And what the priest did was that he went back and he burned some of it to God, obviously, but then he also kept a portion for himself, and the sacrificer was also given a portion back. So this was the sacrifice that they were not only there was this is the one sacrifice that when the sacrificer gave a sacrifice, they get a return of that sacrifice. You see, so and again, you had to eat all of it, and you could not leave none of it until the morrow. And remember, you had to be clean. So if you were somebody that was not a priest and you came to make your Thanksgiving sacrifice, you gave some to God, you gave some to the priest, and you got some back. And you cannot eat it the next day. You had to eat it that day that you sacrificed it. Remember that. Um, okay, and then lastly, if you recall, 31 to 33 is keeping the commandments and not profaning God's name, right? So 31, he says, therefore shall ye keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. This is, remember, the Lord telling Moses, telling him to tell Aaron and the Levite, all his sons, right? Neither shall ye profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord which hallow you. I think this would be a good time to take a look at what this word hallowed is. It's a primitive root to be causatively make, pronounce, or observed, clean, ceremonially, or morally, appoint, bid, consecrate, dedicate, defile, hallow, proclaim, purify, sanctify. Right? So you're making, he's clean, he's holy. He has high standards. Unlike most people, most modern people have very low standards. God had very high standards, and they weren't supposed to profane his holy name. You couldn't just say, some people get mad and they say they use God in their cursing, and it's very popular. You see it all over the movies. Even Jesus Christ using his name nowadays, it's very similar to like when people something happens, they're like, Jesus Christ, man. If they say that, it's kind of people don't know it, but they're profaning his holy name. Why are you, they're using it as a curse word lots of times. They're literally just shouting out Jesus Christ when they're upset or when they're mad at somebody. I mean, that's not really keeping his name holy. That's literally profaning his holy name. And so these are very high standards that the Lord had. And lastly, he reminds them that I am the Lord which hallow you, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. So remember, he brought them out of Egypt in the Exodus, and he did it for a reason. And that reason is what plays out in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. God was making a great sacrifice for all the world to make us all clean, because remember, we were all unclean as far as he was concerned. He was telling us that we were unclean and that they themselves were unclean, and they were only sanctified by him. Remember when we read that in verse 9? I, the Lord, do sanctify them. So he had chosen a people, and he made them clean so that he could play out a story in their kingdom. And that story ultimately comes into fruition. Basically, he predicts the life of Jesus Christ over the course of, you know, thousands, more than 1,000 years. He goes and he makes predictions, and eventually those predictions fully play out in Jesus Christ. So anyway, this has been chapter 22 of Leviticus. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and end this video. And as always, God bless you and have a good one. Thank you.